Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The house felt impossibly hollow in the days following the funeral, every corner steeped in shadows, every creak in the floorboards echoing a life now gone. Silence wasn't just a lack of sound anymore. It was a living thing, heavy and invasive, crawling up the walls and settling into my bones. Each room whispered memories in a voice too quiet to ignore but too loud to escape. Grief had painted the whole house in gray, and I wandered through it like a ghost haunting her own life. I sat alone at the dining table, my fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee I had no real intention of drinking. My eyes stayed fixed. On it, as if it held answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. I had never known that loss could be so physical, like wearing a wet coat you couldn't remove, its chills seeping in deeper with every breath. I felt untethered, adrift in a world that had quietly moved on without me. Just as I began to succumb to that endless stillness, to the pressing darkness that threatened to fold itself around me, a soft, almost hesitant knock broke the quiet. My heart gave a startled jump. For a few seconds, I just stared at the door, unsure if I'd imagined it. Then I rose slowly, legs stiff, as if they too were mourning. When I opened the door, Jason stood there, my late son's best friend. He hadn't changed so much as transformed. The gangly teenager I remembered who used to doze off mid-sentence during late-night video games was gone. In his place stood a man taller now, broad across the shoulders, with a jawline that looked more defined, more mature. His features were still familiar, but time had sharpened them, weathered them with life. There was grief in his eyes. Yes, that much I recognized instantly. But beneath it, there was something else, something unspoken, something raw. And in that quiet second, before either of us spoke, a tremor passed through my chest. Something inside me stirred an ache I hadn't felt in so long. I almost didn't recognize it. He stepped forward a little, hesitant under the porch light. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said finally. His voice was deeper than I remembered, steadier, but laced with real sorrow. It was a small sentence, simple and sincere, but it landed like a stone in my chest. I tried to speak, to offer thanks, but all I could manage was a nod. My voice, like so many other parts of me, had been taken by the grief. First my husband, then my sense of home, my sense of self, and now even my words. Jason shifted slightly, then held out a small plastic container. "I brought you something," he said, a touch of embarrassment in his tone. "Just a casserole, homemade. Figured you might not feel like cooking." It was a modest gesture, nothing elaborate, and yet it cracked something in me. Not in a painful way, but like the first fissure in ice before the thaw. The kindness in it, the normalcy, it hit me harder than any condolences I'd received in the past week. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my voice rough, and stepped aside to let him in. The house almost seemed to breathe him in, his presence, like sunlight after weeks of endless gray skies. He placed the casserole gently on the kitchen counter and turned toward me again, his face lined with a quiet concern that didn't feel performative. It felt real. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, and I could tell he genuinely wanted to know. I offered a weak smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Surviving," I said. The word came out brittle, like a cracked teacup. Not broken, but no longer whole either. Jason hesitated, then reached out gently, taking my hand in his. It wasn't the kind of touch offered out of obligation or the empty kind people give because they don't know what else to do. It was steady, warm, grounding, real. It startled me. That human contact. I'd spent so long feeling invisible, untouched, as if grief had made me untouchable. For a second, I thought about pulling away, about retreating into that numb, safe place where nothing could reach me, but something deeper resisted. I didn't want to let go, not yet. "Would you like me to stay for a while?" he asked. The question came out quiet, almost uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he was crossing some invisible boundary. I glanced around the empty house. At the pictures on the wall, frozen smiles that now felt like cruel reminders of what once was. The silence pressed him again, heavier than before, more unbearable now that I had been reminded what warmth felt like. "Yes," I said, maybe too quickly. "Please." We moved to the living room together. There was a strange comfort in the quiet space between us, a fragile balance of sorrow and safety. Jason sat at one end of the couch, careful with his posture, like he wasn't sure where he fit in the world anymore. I curled up at the other end, pulling a throw blanket over my lap, seeking some kind of barrier between myself and the rawness of it all. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched out, but it didn't feel empty, it felt shared. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant groans of the old house reminded us that time was still moving, even if we weren't. Then, slowly, we began to talk. First, it was simple things: his new job, the changes in the neighborhood, what college had been like. But as the minutes passed, the conversation deepened. He asked about my husband, about what I missed most. The question was soft, sincere, but it opened a locked door inside me. Words tumbled out that I hadn't said to anyone. About the way my husband used to laugh in the early mornings. About the quiet steadiness of his presence. About the way he'd rest his hand on my back when we walked through a crowd. Tiny things, but they were everything. Jason didn't interrupt. He didn't rush me or offer platitudes. He just listened. Fully. Completely. Like I was the only person in the world that mattered in that moment. And when the words finally stopped, when the weight of memory had wrung every tear from me, he leaned in slightly and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You're allowed to miss him and still meet someone." The truth of that hit deeper than I could have imagined. I had to close my eyes to keep from falling apart again. When I opened them, he was closer. The soft light from the side lamp lit half his face and in his eyes. I didn't see pity. I saw understanding, steady, honest, patient. In that moment, I wasn't alone. Not entirely. Not anymore. I felt I was standing on the edge of something both perilous and beautiful, something that could either begin to heal me or break me. Even further, my heart pounded in my chest, unsure yet somehow open. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him like that, not with pity, but with desert breath caught as I felt the quiet electricity in the small space between us, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I allowed myself to wonder, what if moving forward didn't mean forge it? What if it meant finding something new, something gentle, something mending in the wreckage of all I had lost? Jason must have sensed the shift in me eyes, because he smiled slow and hesitant, a smile carrying 1,000 cilantros in. My pulse quickened. I didn't know where the night was going, but for once I wasn't afraid. I was alive, and I was ready to feel. Jason moved slightly, his knee grazing mine in the casual contact. Mad at me breath hitch. It would have been easy to lean away, to retreat into safe distance and pretend the moment hadn't happened, but I didn't. I stayed where I was, letting the warmth of him seep into the cold, hollow places inside me. His gaze held mine, careful and patient, offering me every chance to retreat, every space to say no, but I didn't move. Me heart pounded louder than words. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers lightly curling around his chin was warm and steady, calloused. In contrast to the trembling vulnerability of me, he responded by turning his palm upward, interlacing his fingers. With men, a simple gesture, yet so intimate, it made my throat tighten with emotion. Had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with intention, not from duty, but from care. Jason leaned in, slowly bridging the gap between us. His hand rose, hesitating, bore gently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingertips barely brushed my skin, yet the contact sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, I just looked at me, his gaze weighted with emotion. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with something close to a way no one had said that to me in years, not with that kind of raw, unguarded sincerity. I felt tears threaten, stinging the backs of my eyes, but I blinked them away instead. I leaned into his hand, letting him cradle my cheek. Everything else, the grief, the silence, the endless rehearsed condolence, faded into nothing. There was only this, only him and me, and the aching possibility between us. He moved closer, and I felt his breath against my lips. There was a pause. A quiet hesitation, a final invitation to step back, but I didn't want to. I closed the distance, pressing my lips softly to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative as if we were both afraid to disrupt something fragile. But when I didn't pull away, when I tilted my head to deepen, I responded with urgency, and my heart fluttered wildly. His arms wrapped around me, drawing me against him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly held. The kiss intensified hunger and emotions swirling together like something we had long been deprived of. My hands slid up his chest, feeling the solid weight of him beneath my fingers, grounding me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Had pulled back slightly, just enough to meet me gaze, searching for hesitation, but all he would find was yearning, a deep, aching need to feel again. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and dry. I nodded, unable to speak, and that was all the answer he needed. He rose, pulling me gently to my feet and guiding toward the staircase. Each step was heavy with anticipation, every glance thick with wordless promise. Be the time we reached my bedroom, my hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a dizzying thrill I hadn't felt in years. Jason was careful, almost reverentious. He eased the cardigan off Miss Holder's, his fingertips skimming my skin and leaving heat in their path. Heckus the hollow of my throat, the core of my shoulder moving slowly. Savarinji responded in kind, my fingers sliding through his hair down the strong line of his back, feeling the way his body shifted beneath my touch. When he finally laid me down, it was with a gentleness that made my heart ache. He hovered above my long breath, his gaze exploring me and drinking me in, as if trying to memorize every inch. "You are incredible," he said, and the way he said it made something in Sadine come back to life. He murmured those words, and the wonder in his voice made him believe them too, if only for the night. The rest of our clothes slipped away slowly, deliberately, each piece falling like the shedding of old life's pain. When he touched me, it wasn't with fumbling urgency of youth, but with a reverent, aching care, like he was memorizing me. Piece by piece, no part of me was left unseen, touched or unloved. Every kiss, every caress, every whispered word was a balm to wounds I had long hidden. The connection between us was electric, yes, but it was the emotional intimacy that undid me. The way he looked into my eyes and never looked away, the way he made me feel not broken, not patched together, butcherished. Our bodies moved in a rhythm older than memory, a slow, sensual dance that built towards something inevitable. When I cried out his name, it wasn't just release I felt, it was rebirth. It was reclaiming a part of myself I thought had been lost forever. Afterward, we lay tangled in each other, our breath slowly evening out. The room was wrapped in a soft golden. Jason's fingers traced lazy feather-like patterns along my arm as I, afraid to let go, rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath me ear. For once, the weight of loneliness no longer pressed down on me. I felt warm, grounded. He kissed the top of my head and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." I closed my eyes and let the truth of those words sink in a single night. Jason reminded me that love takes many forms and that healing, though messy and uncertain, is still possible. I had mourned so long for what was lost, I had forgotten to hope for what could be found wrapped in his arms. I finally allowed myself to believe life could still hold unexpected beauty even after so much sorrow, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready to find it again. Morning light crept across the room, casting a gentle glow over tangled sheets and the fading warmth of the night air. I stirred, half expecting to walk alone, bracing for the familiar emptiness, but Jason was still there, his arm draped protectively over me, his breath steady and warm against my hair. For a moment, I let myself exist in that space, in the quiet safety of his embrace, not questioning, not doubting, just feeling. But even as my body relaxed, Mimmin began to unravel reality as always insisted on being acknowledged. I was older, worn, carrying a history. He couldn't possibly understand what we shared last night. Had been beautiful, almost sacred, but could it survive the daylight? Could it live beyond the fragile cocoon we'd spun? In dark fear crept in, filling the cracks with cold out. Jason started sensing the shift, and his fingers brushed softly down my arm. "Penny, for your thoughts," Hemmer mirrored, his voice still thick with sleep. I smiled sadly, tracing slow patterns on his chest. How could I tell him that I was terrified, that no matter how gentle he was, part of me believed that this was temporary, a beautiful illusion that sunlight would shatter. I was just thinking, I said carefully, that last night felt too good to be real. Jason lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. There was no hesitation or regret, only unwavering sincerity. It was real, he said, every second of it, still the doubts gnawed at. Knew how would people think if they knew would they see me as desperate as pathetic, just a woman grasping for warmth in her loneliness would. Jason one day waked beside me and realized he deserved someone younger, simpler. It pulled the blanket tighter as if I could shield my heart. Sensing the shift, Jason propped himself on an elbow and smiled gently. You're overthinking. He said softly, you do that when you're rescued. I blinked, surprised by how easily he read me. Maybe I'm scared. I admitted, you're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. I don't want to hope something new. Regret. His face softened as he cupped my cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. You're not a mistake, he said. You're the bravest, most beautiful woman. I know last night wasn't about filling a void, it was about finding something. Real. I wanted to believe him, God, how I wanted to, but old wounds whisper lies in the silence. I leaned into his palm, trying to quiet the voices. What happens now, I whispered, when the world comes back in, when it's not just you and me in this room? Jason paused, choosing his words with care. I don't have all the answers, Hesed, but I know how I feel, and I'm not walking away, not from this, not from you. His words settled over me like album, soothing, but not erasing the ache of uncertainty later. As we dressed and moved through the motions of an ordinary morning, an unspoken heaviness lingered. Every casual brush of his hand, every lingering glance, carried the weight of something that had shifted between us. We weren't just two lonely souls finding comfort. We're tethered now. A knock at the door startled us. Both. Jason glanced at me, gently asking if I wanted him. Tones where I shook my head, pulling on Miss Sweeter, smoothing down my hair. Whoever it was, they could wait. I needed a moment to gather myself, to decide how much of last night's magic I was willing to let the world see. But I knew the real battle isn't with others, it was with myself, with my fear of being vulnerable, fear of hoping again, fear of giving my heart to something I couldn't control. Jason came up behind me, arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, we face it together. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise I hadn't even realized I needed for the first time in what felt like forever. I leaned into that promise, let myself believe not in fairy tales or perfect endings, but in the messy, beautiful possibility of something, something worth fighting for, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Days that followed weren't easy, but they were real. There were moments of doubt, off pulling away, of questioning whether this fragile thing could last, but Jason never wavered when I faltered. He studied me when I doubted. He reminded me with quiet gestures, with steady words, that love doesn't always come the way we expect. Samidis, it arrived softly, slipping through the cracks in a broken heart, and blooming in spite of everything. We kept to our connection, private, savoring that quiet moments only we knew. The glances across the room, the stolen touches, the late night conversations that slowly stitched us back together. There were challenges, but we faced them hand in hand, knowing that what we had was perfect. But it washness. Jason never made me feel like a burden or a mistake. He made me feel seen, wanted, loved, not despite my scars, but because of the moon evening as the sun bathed the world in warm gold. Jason took my hand and said, you saved me too. I smiled through the tears that welled in my eyes, realizing this wasn't just about healing, this was about building something new. Neither of us had dared to dream of, but both of us needed more than whatever knew.